To discuss, we're joined by Professor Rouaan Maarman, who is the Deputy Dean for Research and Postgraduate Studies at the University of the Western Cape's Education Faculty. Professor, thank you for being with us. This cohort was affected by the Covid-19 lockdown in grade 10, and we were talking about at the time, what does that mean for the future? We now can realize that. And then, of course, they were hit by load shedding last year. The Director General saying they're resilient and hinting that the results could be more glowing than last year. Would that be a great achievement?
Good afternoon, Francis, and your viewers. I think in context it would be, I think what the pandemic threw at us was very unexpected. I think we must realize that we've moved on in certain ways, but I think the effects of the pandemic is still with us. I think the Department of Education also put in place certain things to support the learners since their grade 10 year. That played a role. We became more accustomed in the schools on how to deal with the backlog, so to speak. And I think there were a lot of supportive programs that were implemented by the different schools and school communities to support the learners. So yes, we expected an improvement. It would be very interesting to see exactly what that improvement is, in which areas the improvement took place, and also in terms of the overall movement of these learners, this cohort of learners since 2020.
He did suggest that the quintile 1 to 3, I think it was, so that's the poorest category of schools, has improved substantially when it comes to bachelor's passes. Is that good news as well? We know the shutdowns when learning went online, the poor children experienced that the most, the intensity of load shedding. It's the kids in townships experiencing that the most. So that would point to resilience, or at least measures being put in place that are working.
Yeah, I think that's the dilemma of analyzing the statistics at this point. Without proper investigations and research projects to really look at what played out in these school communities, we won't be able to say what it was, So for now, it would be safe to take a balanced approach, to acknowledge there has been hard work going into the results, but also to say we keep a critical eye on the exact dynamics, why the learners have done better. We know, for example, that, and they have acknowledged it in many press briefings, that the Department of Basic Education do target setting. So as soon as you go into that sphere, what you do is that you adapt your teaching methodology, you adapt certain ways of preparing learners for tests, but that does not necessarily mean that they have learned well. So we have to keep a balance in terms of understanding the statistics and understanding the improvement. And the only way to do that and to get to a position is to really do some research on it.
All right, sure. The number we do have is that 400,000 or so kids dropped out between grade 1 and grade 12. So that throughput rate is something of concern in South Africa. It has been for years. What does that number tell you?
Look, I think that's the most important indicator for us, because you have to look at the whole basic education system from grade R as it is nowadays until grade 12. We obviously have a big focus on the matriculants because it is a high stakes examination, an examination which determines your future. So we understand that, and we don't have a lot of issues with that focus point there. But we have to ensure that we keep our eyes on what's happening since the first grade when learners enter school. What is important here is that we know that this should actually be commensurate with other kinds of indicators. Like, for example, this is the systemic testing that takes place. What does that actually tell us, right? It is some indicator. International benchmarking tests that we participate in as a country, what does that tell us? So we have to look at that. The throughput rate is an important one because it tells us our basic education system is not yet settled. It is not yet a system where you can predict what's going to happen, a system with proper rhythm. So, for example, we have started schools last week inland and this week on the coastal provinces, and we've seen the disruptions for learning. So these 3 days for the coastal provinces and this week for the inland provinces has already been a tumultuous one for learners to study. We have to get into the habit in South Africa and with our basic education system that teaching time, learning time, time on task, if you want, is very important. And from the first day of school, the learner is supposed to participate in proper learning activities. Because in certain schools that is happening, but it's not happening in all our schools. So we will always have this issue. We have to get the system up and running. We have to prepare better for the start of a new school year. And we have to ensure that our learners are attending school. So everybody's excited in the beginning of the year to go to school. But what is happening in a few months' time? What is happening by the third term of the school year, etc.? What's happening during the winter times? What's happening in the flooding that we see in the summer months inland? What is the real school performance? What is the real school attendance?
Yeah.
And I think these are some of the dynamics that plays into the throughput rate.
And it'll be really interesting to see how KwaZulu-Natal performs, given the flooding there, etc. So you're saying we need more detail on these results. But Professor, overall, what do you think is happening? Because tonight we will hear good news from the Department of Basic Education, according to all indications right now. Then you'll hear politicians saying, well, the pass rate is low. We shouldn't have pass rates of 30% in any subject. And the quality is poor. We know that international benchmarks that you spoke about, numeracy, literacy, we haven't performed well. What would you say is the quality of our education right now?
Franz, I'm so glad for that question because you captured it so well. It's all about quality education. And currently in South Africa, I'm not sure whether we have a shared and common understanding of what quality education is supposed to mean for us in the basic education sector. If we have that, then we would know exactly what are the indicators that matters for us. Because what's happening currently, we have all these kinds of statistics. And it is good that it's becoming more and more transparent every year. But as politicians, for example, and as the public, as academics and researchers, we focus on the statistics that matters for our agendas, right? We know that in South Africa. But the encompassing debate and discourse that we need to have is about what quality education actually means in the South African context. And that should be inclusive, but it should also be contextual. And that is a deep conversation that the South African basic education sector needs.
All right, we appreciate your time. We've run out of time, but hopefully the conversation will continue, and I'm sure it will after we start getting the grain, the nitty-gritty of those numbers tonight. That was UWC Education Faculty Deputy Dean for Research Postgraduate Studies as well, Professor Rouaan Maarman.